My name is Raina Mercer. I'm 34. And I didn't know my life was about to crack in half until a phone lit up the dark like a warning flare. People think betrayal is loud, screaming, slamming doors, a lipstick stain on a collar. But the kind that changes you forever? It's quiet. It's a vibrating phone at 3 a.m. It's the soft glow of a screen on your nightstand. It's your own heartbeat getting louder than the entire house. I'm an engineer by trade, the kind who trusts measurements over moods. I grind at work, handle responsibilities without excuses, and I built my home with my own 2 hands, foundation to roof. Every beam and bolt felt like proof that I could create stability out of raw materials and stubborn will. That house was my pride long before it was our home. I'd been with Caleb for 9 years. 9. We met when we were 25 and still believed love could fix anything if you just wanted it badly enough. Caleb was charming in the way that made strangers feel like friends. He lived for attention, for group chats, for being the funny one in the room. He collected people like souvenirs and got restless if a weekend passed without a party, a brunch, a plan. Me? I liked quiet. I liked a clean kitchen, a paid bill, a Friday night where nobody expected me to perform. We made it work because I thought balance was the point. He brought color, I brought structure. And for a long time, I told myself that was love. Caleb kept a tight-knit circle from his university days, people who still spoke like they were living in the same dorm hallway. I endured them. I smiled. I showed up. But I never belonged, not really. And then there was Daria, his ex-girlfriend. Not officially, not the way he said it. To him, Daria was family, a best friend, a soulmate in a platonic way. The kind of phrase that sounds innocent until you notice how often it gets repeated, like a spell meant to keep reality away. My instincts didn't scream. They whispered. Small things. The way Caleb's posture changed when her name came up, like he suddenly remembered how to be impressive. The way he defended her before I even finished a sentence. The way she looked at me like I was furniture in his life. Useful, steady, replaceable. I didn't have proof. And I've always believed that a relationship without trust is just 2 people holding each other hostage. So I swallowed it. I told myself, if I'm wrong, I'm paranoid. If I'm right, I'll know soon enough. I didn't realize how cruel the human body can be when it already knows the truth. How your stomach can drop before your brain catches up. That Tuesday night, I woke up half asleep, slipping out of bed to use the bathroom. The hallway was cold. The house creaked the way it always did in winter, like it was settling into its bones. When I returned to the bedroom, I noticed something that didn't belong. Light. Caleb's phone on the nightstand was buzzing over and over. 20 straight minutes of vibration, a relentless insistence. The screen flashed like Times Square on New Year's Eve. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Caleb didn't stir. He slept heavy when he'd been drinking, and the night before he'd come home late, laughing too loud, smelling like cologne and someone else's perfume layered under it. I stood there, frozen, with that engineer part of my mind trying to turn the moment into math. 20 minutes, same number, same thread. My hand moved before my heart could stop it. The message preview showed a name, Daria. And in that instant, my body went cold, like every drop of blood pulled away from my skin. I opened the thread. I wish I could say I hesitated. I wish I could say I was noble. I wasn't. I was tired of feeling like the only adult in a relationship built on, don't make it weird. The first message on the screen was enough to turn my stomach. Can't stop thinking about you in that red dress today. I blinked hard, like the words might rearrange themselves into something harmless, if I stared long enough. They didn't. When I took it off, you looked incredible. How much longer are we doing this? I want you full time. When are you leaving Raina? Last night was amazing. Does your girlfriend really not suspect anything? She must be blind. My throat tightened so fast it felt like being grabbed. I scrolled and scrolled. 6 months. Half a year of messages. Not vague flirting. Not I miss you. Not a drunken slip. Detailed planning. Hotel confirmations. Screenshots of reservation emails. Inside jokes about me. About my boring routine. My spreadsheet life. My strict little house rules. There were photos I didn't want to see. Photos that felt like someone had walked into my home and spit on my floor. The worst part wasn't even the affair. It was the tone. They didn't talk about me like I was a person. They talked about me like I was a hurdle, an obstacle, a punchline. I stood in my own bedroom, inches from the man I'd trusted for 9 years, and watched my life evaporate on a 5-inch screen. My hands were shaking, not dramatic shaking, not cinematic, the quiet kind, like my body was trying to hold itself together with trembling. Then something in me clicked. I took screenshots, every message I could. I airdropped them to myself, thumb moving fast, efficient, automatic, like I was saving blueprints before a building collapse. When I was done, I placed the phone back exactly where I found it. Screen down, perfectly aligned. Then I went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection like I was meeting a stranger. Because the girl in the mirror looked calm. But her eyes? Her eyes looked like someone who'd finally stopped hoping. Here's the thing about women like me. I don't explode. I calculate. The next 3 days were an acting masterclass. I made breakfast like normal. I asked Caleb about his day. I kissed him goodbye like my mouth didn't know it was saying farewell to a lie. And every time he smiled at me, every time he called me baby with that soft, practiced voice, I felt something solidify inside my chest. Not sadness, a boundary. At work, between meetings, I pulled up our credit card statements. Hotel charges across town. Restaurants I'd never been to. A boutique purchase on a day he told me he was working late. He'd been spending our money to build a secret life. At night, I started making lists. Legal steps, locks, passwords, documentation. I didn't sleep much, and when I did, it wasn't rest. It was my body shutting down in self-defense. By Thursday evening, Caleb came home looking wrong. Not guilty exactly. More like nervous. Like someone who'd rehearsed a script and was hoping I'd stick to mine. We sat down to dinner, the house quiet except for the clink of silverware. He poked at his food like he couldn't swallow. Then he cleared his throat, and I felt it, this sense of a trap being set. I talked to Daria today, he said, staring at his plate. She's really upset. I lifted my eyes slowly, kept my face neutral. About what? I asked. He finally looked up, and the expression he wore was almost offended. Like I'd violated some unspoken rule by existing. She thinks you don't like her, he said. That you're cold. I took a bite, chewed slowly, and waited. He continued, voice gathering confidence like he'd practiced it in the car. She says you act jealous, like you're threatened by our friendship, and honestly, Raina, you've been kind of insecure about her for a while. In my head, I saw the messages. She must be blind. When are you leaving her? And there he was, sitting in my home, eating my food, calling me insecure. The audacity was so clean it almost looked like courage. I set my fork down gently. Caleb, I said softly, what do you want me to do about it? He exhaled like he'd been waiting for that exact line. I want you to apologize, he said. The room seemed to tilt. Apologize, I repeated. Yes, he said, more firmly now, for making her feel unwelcome, for always insinuating something inappropriate is happening, for being paranoid and jealous. He leaned back like this was the reasonable conclusion, like I should thank him for the clarity. She's one of my oldest friends, he added. This has to stop. I looked at him across the table and realized something terrifying. They had planned this. Get the suspicious girlfriend to apologize, make her doubt herself, turn her into the villain so their secret could keep breathing. And in that moment, I understood exactly what kind of fight this was. Not love. Not betrayal. A power play. I nodded once, slow. Okay, I said. Relief flashed across his face, brief, smug, careless. He thought he'd won. He had no idea I'd already taken the map of his lie and set it on fire. The scariest part wasn't that Caleb had the nerve to demand an apology. It was how comfortable he looked doing it. Like the last 9 years had trained him to believe I would always choose peace over truth. Always swallow discomfort to keep the house quiet. Always play the role of the stable one while he chased whatever made him feel alive. He sat there across from me, shoulders loosening, like the tension in the room had been resolved. And I realized something sharp and ugly. He didn't just cheat. He counted on me not fighting back. Good, he said, pushing his plate away with a satisfied little sigh. Because Daria's been really hurt. And honestly, this whole thing has been exhausting. Exhausting. As if I was the storm in our relationship, as if his secret hotel life was just weather I was overreacting to. I tilted my head slightly, the way I do at work when someone tries to explain a system that clearly doesn't make sense. You want me to call her right now? I asked, voice level. Yes, Caleb said instantly, too fast. Right now. She's expecting it. Of course she was. I could practically see them. Caleb texting her earlier that day, telling her the plan was working, that I was finally being reasonable. Daria probably sipping something expensive, smirking at the thought of me apologizing for being the only person with eyes. I smiled faintly. Not warm, not friendly. Just controlled. Okay, I said again. You're right. Caleb's shoulders dropped like he'd been holding his breath. Thank you, he said, and the gratitude in his voice made my skin crawl. Seriously, this is what adults do. Adults. I almost laughed. Instead, I reached for my phone. Then I reached for his. He blinked. What are you doing? If I'm apologizing, I said calmly, I need her number. You said she's expecting it. So, let's not waste time. Caleb hesitated for half a beat, so quick most people wouldn't even notice. But I noticed, because people who are innocent don't hesitate like that. Finally, he slid his phone across the table like it weighed 100 pounds. I picked it up and scrolled through his contacts. There she was, Daria. No last name, just one clean name, like she was a constant. My thumb hovered over it for a second. Not because I was scared, because I was savoring the stillness before the collapse. Then I tapped call. I turned on speaker. And I set the phone down between us like it was a courtroom microphone. Caleb watched me, lips pressed together, trying to look composed, but his knees started bouncing under the table, fast and anxious. The call rang. Once. Twice. She answered on the second ring. Hey, babe, Daria said, her voice bright, too bright, confident, smug, like she was already winning. The word babe hit the air and just stayed there, heavy, alive. Caleb's face drained so quickly I thought he might actually pass out. Daria kept going, oblivious. Is the idiot asleep yet? She asked with a laugh that made my stomach twist. Tell me you're not still stuck at that dinner table. Come on. I'm already at the usual place. The usual place. There was a moment of silence so perfect it felt staged, like the entire house paused to listen. Caleb stared at the phone like it had turned into a weapon. Daria finally hesitated. Hello, she said, voice shifting. Caleb? I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands like I was in a meeting. This is Raina, I said, calm enough to terrify myself. Caleb's girlfriend. The idiot. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then scrambling, like fabric moving, a chair scraping, panic rearranging the room. Wait, what? Daria said too fast. No, this isn't... Caleb lunged for the phone. I put my hand over it gently, not aggressively. Just enough to remind him, I control this moment. Don't, I said, without looking away from him. Caleb froze, fingers hovering midair, like a man who just realized he walked into the wrong house. On speaker, Daria's voice rose, syrupy and fake. Raina, listen, this is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. You called him babe. You asked if I was asleep. You said you're already at the usual place. How long have you been meeting him there? Silence again. Then, softer now, Daria tried to pivot. Okay, look, I shouldn't have said it like that, but... 6 months, I cut in. Caleb flinched. Daria went quiet like I'd slapped her. I saw the messages, I continued, still calm. Hotel confirmations, photos, jokes about me, charges on her credit card. I have screenshots of everything. Every single thing you thought you could delete. I heard Daria swallow. Then she tried one last time, voice trembling with rage. You went through his phone? That's psycho. The audacity almost impressed me. I smiled, slow and cold. Actually, I said, what psycho is sleeping with someone's partner for half a year and then trying to gaslight her into apologizing to you? Caleb finally found his voice. Raina, please, he whispered, his eyes wide. I looked at him then, really looked, and I felt the last of my nostalgia snap. I spoke into the phone again. So, Daria, I said, conversational, since you wanted an apology, here it is. I'm sorry you were raised to think stealing someone's life is a personality trait. I'm sorry you believed I'd be too quiet to fight back. And I'm sorry, truly, that you're about to find out what consequences look like. Daria made a strangled sound. Then, click, she hung up. Coward. Caleb stared at me like he'd never seen me before, like I'd taken off a mask he didn't realize I was wearing. Raina, he said, voice cracking. I can explain. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said simply. You can't. He started shaking his head, frantic. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said, my tone still even. And it's worse than I thought because you didn't just cheat. You tried to make me feel guilty for noticing. Tears jumped into his eyes, fast and dramatic. Caleb always cried like he was performing. I was confused, he pleaded. You've been so distant. You're always working. You don't get to blame my stability for your betrayal, I cut in. He flinched again. I stood up, pushing my chair in neatly, because even rage in me has rules. Pack your things, I said. His mouth fell open. What? You heard me. This is my home too, he snapped, panic turning into anger. I tilted my head. No, I said, it's not. Caleb blinked. I walked past him, down the hallway, and stopped at the framed photo by the stairs. A picture of the house mid-construction. Me in work boots and gloves, hair tied up, standing on the skeleton of what would become my living room. Sweat on my forehead, pride in my eyes. "I bought this house 2 years before you and I ever moved in together," I said, voice quiet. "The deed is in my name. The mortgage is in my name. The locks are in my name." I turned back to him. "You have exactly zero legal right to be here once I tell you to leave." His face twisted like he couldn't believe I'd say it out loud. "You're seriously doing this?" he demanded. "Over a few texts?" I let out a small breath. "A few texts?" I repeated. "Caleb, there are hotel receipts, plans, photos. 6 months of you laughing about me while I paid for a life you were sneaking away from." His eyes darted, looking for leverage, for softness. He found none. I went into the bedroom and yanked open the closet. Then I started pulling his clothes off the hangers. Shirts, jeans, hoodies. I tossed them into the hallway. Caleb followed me, voice rising. "You can't just throw me out." "I can," I said, grabbing his shoes. "And I am." He grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but enough. My body went very still. Caleb seemed to realize what he'd done because he released me immediately, hands up like he hadn't meant it. "Sorry," he said quickly. This is insane." I stared at him for a long beat. Then I resumed packing like he hadn't spoken. He started crying again, fast, sloppy, angry tears. "Where am I supposed to go?" I shrugged. "Daria's," I said. "Your parents, a hotel. You seem to know plenty." "That's not fair." "You want fairness?" I snapped, my voice lifting for the first time. It wasn't loud. It was sharp. "You spent 6 months stealing from me. Money, trust, time, and you want fair?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I kept tossing his belongings into bags with a cold efficiency that felt almost surgical. Then Caleb's eyes landed on my workstation set up in the corner of the bedroom. Not just a computer. My build. My escape. My pride. He stared at it like it offended him. "You really care more about your stuff than me," he said bitterly. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward him. "No," I said. "I care more about myself than I care about your lies." His jaw tightened. And then I saw it, the shift, the rage behind the tears. The part of him that couldn't stand losing control. He lunged toward the desk. My stomach dropped. "Don't," I warned, voice low. Caleb's fingers wrapped around the tower like he was going to rip it out by the cables. "You want to throw my life out?" he hissed. "Let's see how you like it." He started dragging it toward the window. And for the first time that night, my calm cracked. Not into panic, but into action. I moved fast. I grabbed his wrist and yanked the tower back toward the desk, keeping my balance, planting my feet like I was bracing against a force I'd built my whole life to withstand. "Put it down," I said, teeth clenched. Caleb struggled, wild and desperate. "Let go," he shouted. "No." The tower swung between us, cables dangling like veins. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "You already destroyed 9 years," I said. "You're not destroying what I built to survive you." Something in my tone must have reached him, because he hesitated. Just enough for me to wrench it free and slam it safely back onto the desk. Caleb stumbled backward, chest heaving. He looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Because the woman who would have begged him to stay? The woman who would have doubted herself? She died at 3 a.m. under the glow of his phone. And the woman standing here now? She didn't ask for permission. She didn't apologize for instincts. She enforced boundaries like steel. "Pack," I said again, quieter this time. Faster. Caleb stared at me. Then, finally, he started shoving his things into bags with shaking hands. But as he moved, as the house filled with the sound of zippers and dragged suitcases, I realized something. This wasn't over. Not really. Because people like Caleb don't accept consequences gracefully. They come back. They rewrite history. They recruit allies. And deep down I knew. Daria wasn't done either. The morning after Caleb left, the house felt different. Not quieter. Cleaner. Like the air itself had decided it was done carrying secrets. I didn't sleep much. I didn't need to. My body was running on something sharper than adrenaline. Clarity. I moved through the house in socks, coffee untouched on the counter, opening drawers and cabinets with a focus that surprised even me. I called a divorce attorney before 9, left a voicemail. Calm, factual, no emotion, just dates, evidence, and one clean sentence. There was a 6-month affair. I have proof, and I want it handled properly. Then I changed the locks. All of them. Front door, back door, garage. I updated passwords, moved my important documents into the office safe, froze joint credit cards, and pulled copies of every financial statement I could find. By noon, my life looked less like a relationship fallout and more like a controlled demolition. That's the thing people don't understand about women like me. When we stop hoping, we start preparing. I was in the garage late Saturday morning, boxing up the last of Caleb's remaining things, random tools, old hoodies, cables he'd forgotten, when I heard a car pull up. Then another door slam. Then voices. I straightened slowly. My stomach didn't drop, my pulse didn't spike. It settled, like a chess player recognizing a predictable move. I walked to the front of the house and opened the door. There they were, Caleb and Daria, standing in my driveway like they had every right to be there. Daria had positioned herself half a step behind him, close enough to look united, far enough to look innocent. Her arms were crossed. Her face was carefully neutral, the way people look when they're already planning to be offended. Caleb puffed his chest out the moment he saw me, like he'd rehearsed this stance in the mirror. "Raina," he said, trying for authority, "we need to talk." I didn't answer. I just stood there, arms crossed, weight even on both feet, blocking the doorway without touching the frame. Daria tilted her head slightly, eyes flicking over me, assessing. "She told me how you treated her," Caleb continued, throwing her stuff out, grabbing her. "That's not okay." I blinked once. "She cheated on me with you for 6 months," I said evenly. "And you're here lecturing me?" "That doesn't give you the right to put your hands on her," he shot back. "I stopped her from trying to destroy my property," I replied. "Big difference." Daria stepped forward then, voice soft, practiced. "Raina, please," she said. "We're just here to get his things. Can we be adults about this?" I almost laughed. Adults. The word tasted bitter. "His things are being boxed up," I said. "They'll be on the porch tomorrow. You're not coming inside, and you're not bringing her here again." Caleb scoffed. "See?" he said, turning to Daria like he was presenting evidence. "This is exactly what I mean. She's controlling." I felt something stir in my chest, not anger. Amusement. "Get off my property," I said calmly. Caleb stepped closer. "We're not leaving until—" "I'm giving you 10 seconds," I cut in. "After that, I'm calling the police." Daria's eyes flickered. Caleb smirked. "Oh, you're going to call the cops?" he said. "For standing on a driveway? Grow up. You got cheated on. It happens." My jaw tightened. "He wasn't happy," Daria added quietly. "He found someone who appreciated him." I stared at her. "You mean someone who helped him lie," I said. "That's not appreciation, that's opportunism." Caleb took another step forward. "You don't get to talk to her like that." I didn't move. "Leave," I said again. He didn't. Instead, he stepped onto the edge of my lawn, past the invisible line that separated my patience from consequences. "Raina," he said, voice lowering, "you're going to apologize, and you're going to let us in, right now." "No." The word landed clean. Caleb's jaw clenched, and then he shoved my shoulder. Not hard, but deliberate. "Enough." I took a step back, not from the shove, but from surprise. And Caleb, too focused on proving a point, didn't watch his footing. His heel caught on something at the edge of the driveway. My tool bag. The one I'd set down earlier while packing. Time slowed. Caleb windmilled, trying to recover. Failed. He stumbled backward, straight into the pristine white picket fence separating my yard from Joyce's house 2 doors down. The sound was sharp and final. Wood cracked. Post snapped. Caleb went through the fence like a wrecking ball and landed hard in Joyce's flower bed on the other side. Tulips exploded under his weight. Pink, yellow, white. Crushed. His foot kicked something ceramic. A garden gnome shattered against the stone border with a sound that made my stomach clench. Silence. Daria screamed. Caleb groaned, scrambling upright, covered in dirt, tulip petals, and splinters. And then, Joyce's front door flew open. She stormed out in pajama pants, an oversized t-shirt, hair in curlers, eyes blazing with the fury of a woman whose sanctuary had just been violated. She took one look at her destroyed garden, her broken fence, her shattered gnome, and then she saw Caleb. "What?" she said, voice trembling with rage. "Did you do to my garden?" Caleb stumbled, hands up. "It was an accident. I tripped." "An accident?" Joyce repeated, already marching across her lawn. "Those tulips were imported from Holland. That gnome was from my mother." "Lady, calm down," Caleb said. "Wrong." Joyce bent down, yanked off one foam house slipper, and hurled it with terrifying accuracy. It hit him square in the face. Daria gasped. Caleb staggered. "Did you just throw a shoe at me?" he shouted. "You destroyed my property," Joyce yelled, ripping off the other slipper. "My mother gave me that gnome." "It's a garden gnome," he snapped. The second slipper flew, hit him in the chest. Joyce stood barefoot in her yard, shaking with fury. "It's not just a gnome," she said. "It's a memory." Daria stepped forward, flustered. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. Joyce whirled on her. And who are you? You brought this mess here, Joyce snapped. And now you're all going to deal with the police. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. Caleb's bravado evaporated. You're calling the cops over some flowers? Imported from Holland, Joyce said sharply. $15 a bulb, plus my fence, plus my gnome, plus emotional distress. She rattled off numbers like a prosecutor. I stood on my porch, arms crossed. Not smiling, not interfering, just watching karma work with surgical precision. 2 police cruisers arrived 10 minutes later. Joyce had photos, witnesses, a timeline. She even changed into real clothes before giving her statement. The officers listened. Then they turned to Caleb. Sir, is this your property? No. Then why are you here? I was helping her, he said, pointing at me. Get her things. And did you shove the homeowner? Caleb hesitated. Yes. That was enough. By the end of it, Caleb was cited for trespassing, assault, and destruction of property. Daria got a warning. Joyce got apologies, and I got thanked for not escalating the situation. As they were told to leave, I closed my door. Not slammed, closed. Because when something no longer belongs in your life, you don't make a scene, you remove it. And as I watched them drive away through the window, one thing was painfully clear. They didn't just lose, they exposed themselves. And this was only the beginning. By Monday morning, my attorney sounded almost cheerful. Not because she enjoyed other people's misery, but because clean cases are rare, and this one was immaculate. 6 months of affair texts, hotel confirmations, credit card statements showing marital funds used for hookups, phone records. And now, police reports documenting trespass, physical contact, and property destruction. This, she said, tapping the stack of papers during our first in-person meeting, is about as straightforward as it gets. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. We moved fast, because when evidence is this overwhelming, there's nothing left to argue, only damage control. Caleb's lawyer tried anyway. They always do. They claimed I was controlling, emotionally distant, too focused on work, that Caleb had felt neglected. My attorney didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid out a timeline that showed Caleb scheduling hotel rooms during work hours, on days he told me he was staying late. She showed how he'd used our joint card for gifts and rooms for Daria, while contributing less and less at home. You don't get spousal sympathy, she said calmly, when you're funding an affair with shared money. That argument died in about 10 minutes. The settlement took 8 weeks. Caleb walked away with 15% of our joint savings, after repaying nearly $6,000 he'd spent on hotels, dinners, and surprises. No spousal support, no claim to the house, no leverage. After legal fees, he left a 9-year relationship with roughly $9,000. I kept the house. I kept my savings. And more importantly, I kept my spine. But the real spectacle? That came after. See, Caleb and Daria didn't fade quietly into shame. They doubled down. 3 weeks after the driveway incident, they moved in together. Apparently, they believed that once I was out of the way, their love story would finally breathe. Friends told me about it like it was gossip from a soap opera. Daria moved into Caleb's rental across town. She posted vague, defiant photos online. Sunsets, wine glasses, captions about choosing happiness. Caleb changed his profile picture to something artsy and dramatic. They wanted the world to believe they'd won. What they didn't understand was this. Affairs survive on stolen time. Real life doesn't. Within weeks, cracks started leaking out. Daria hated that Caleb left dishes everywhere, that he never cleaned unless asked, that he expected her to handle things the way I always had. Caleb hated that Daria was expensive, that she wanted nights out, upgrades, attention, without understanding the numbers behind them, that she assumed he'd cover more because we're a team now. The thrill evaporated under rent, groceries, and silence. A mutual friend mentioned hearing Caleb complain at the gym, said Daria was needy, always dissatisfied, nothing like he imagined. Meanwhile, Daria was venting at work about how Caleb was just as boring as Raina, but without the money or stability. That one stung until I laughed. Because imagine burning your entire life down just to realize you traded a foundation for a fantasy. The implosion accelerated. About 6 weeks in, the shouting started. Neighbors complained about yelling matches late at night, arguments about money, messes, trust, about whether Caleb ever really loved Daria or just loved the secrecy. And then came the final twist. Caleb had started messaging another ex, apologizing, saying he'd made a mistake, asking if they could talk. That ex, smart woman, screenshotted everything and sent it directly to Daria with a single line. "He's your problem now. Good luck." Daria lost it. She threw Caleb's PlayStation out the third-floor apartment window. Neighbors called the cops. Warnings were issued. The breakup followed 3 weeks later. Caleb kicked Daria out after she accused him of never loving her, of using her for the thrill and discarding her when reality arrived. Daria moved back in with her parents. Caleb tried crawling back to the ex he'd messaged. She blocked him everywhere. Their social circles evaporated. Friends distanced themselves after seeing screenshots and hearing the full timeline. Even Daria's own sister stopped returning her calls. And then karma found Daria at work. Someone anonymously posted screenshots of her affair messages on the company's internal gossip forum, not because of the cheating, but because she'd used company time and her work laptop to coordinate hotel visits. HR called her in. She was demoted. Her salary was cut by 40%. They moved her to a basement office. She quit 2 weeks later rather than face the humiliation. By the time the dust settled, both of them were broke. Both isolated. Both staring at the ruins of lives they'd traded for 6 months of hotel rooms and stolen mornings. Meanwhile, my life got quieter and stronger. The first thing I noticed wasn't happiness. It was silence. The good kind. The kind that doesn't feel empty, just unoccupied. No tension humming under the floorboards. No bracing myself before opening the front door. No wondering who I was competing with in my own relationship. Just me and the house I built. I started sleeping again. Not the exhausted kind of sleep where your body shuts down because it has no choice, but real rest. The kind where you wake up without that tight knot in your chest, without replaying conversations you wish you'd handled differently. At work, something shifted. About a month after the divorce finalized, my manager pulled me aside after a project review. "Whatever you're doing differently," he said, leaning back in his chair, "keep doing it. Your focus has been incredible lately." I smiled politely. What I didn't say was this: it's amazing how productive you become when you're no longer being lied to in your own bed. I got the promotion 3 weeks later. More responsibility, more money, more trust. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was carrying 2 adults on one spine. I rebuilt my workstation next. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because it felt symbolic. I upgraded everything. Better GPU, more RAM, new monitor, cleaner cable management. The whole setup ran quieter, faster, smoother. Like me, Friday nights became mine again. Gaming with friends, music low, lights dim, no guilt for enjoying my own space, no passive-aggressive comments about always being on that thing. I joined a gym nearby, not out of revenge, not out of rage, just consistency. 3 days a week turned into 4. The weight came off slowly. 15 pounds over a few months. My shoulders felt stronger. My posture changed. People started telling me I looked different. I felt different. Then, at a conference downtown, I met Evan. Nothing dramatic, no sparks flying across the room, no cinematic collision. We ended up sitting at the same table during a break, both complaining about bad coffee. The conversation was easy, curious, respectful. He didn't interrupt me, didn't try to impress me, didn't perform. We exchanged numbers, then texts, then coffee, then dinner, then another dinner that lasted longer than planned because neither of us wanted to be the first to leave. Evan was steady, direct, emotionally present without being overwhelming, financially independent, comfortable with silence. Everything Caleb had pretended to be. 3 months in, Evan asked carefully about my divorce. "What happened?" he said. "If you don't mind me asking." I told him. All of it. No dramatics, no victim speech, just facts. Found the affair, confronted it, ended it, documented everything, moved on. Evan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once. "You handled that exactly right," he said. "Some people might call it harsh." I shrugged. "Some people don't like boundaries when they're enforced." He smiled. "I respect that," he said. "It tells me you don't abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable." That sentence stayed with me. Life felt aligned. And that's when the universe decided to test whether I really meant it. Because 6 months after the divorce was finalized, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there he was, Caleb. He looked small. Not physically, just diminished. Messy hair, no confidence. Sweatpants and a hoodie like he'd given up on being seen. In his hands, he held an aluminum, foil-covered plate. "Hi, Raina," he said softly. My stomach didn't flip. My heart didn't race. I just felt tired. What do you want? I asked. He swallowed. Can we talk? He said. Just 5 minutes. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. I wasn't letting the past back inside. I wanted to apologize, he said, eyes fixed on the plate. I made a huge mistake. I destroyed something good because I was selfish and stupid. I nodded once. Okay. He looked up, hopeful. And I was thinking, his voice cracked, maybe we could try again. Start over. I've learned so much about myself, about what really matters. There it was. I exhaled slowly. Caleb, I said, we're not starting over. His face fell. I'm broke, he admitted, desperation spilling out now. Living with my parents. I don't have my job anymore. Daria's gone. I have nothing. I looked at him and felt nothing. That's not my problem, I said gently. But I made you dinner, he said quickly, lifting the plate. Your favorite. I recognized it instantly. His attempt at lemon chicken, the one he always oversalted, the one I pretended to like for years because effort mattered more than execution. Caleb, I said, I don't want your dinner, I don't want your apology, and I don't want you. He started crying then, full on, ugly, desperate. I was confused, he said. I didn't know what I wanted. You knew, I replied. You just didn't think you'd lose. Silence settled between us. And then, Joyce's front door opened. Of course it did. She marched across her lawn in gardening gloves, holding a trowel, eyes narrowing the second she recognized him. You, she said, pointing at Caleb, you're the one who destroyed my tulips. Caleb went pale. Joyce looked at me, then back at him, then at the plate. What's that? I made her dinner, Caleb muttered. Nobody wants your dinner, Joyce said flatly. She grabbed the plate out of his hands before he could react, peeled back the foil, looked at the sad, soggy chicken, and without hesitation, she dumped the entire plate over his head. Sauce slid down his hair. Lemon slices clung to his shoulders. Chicken landed on his hoodie and fell to the porch like gravity itself was judging him. I burst out laughing. I couldn't stop. It was too perfect. The man who demanded I apologize to his affair partner, now standing on my porch, covered in his own cooking, humiliated by the neighbor whose garden he'd destroyed. Get off the street, Joyce snapped, and don't come back. Caleb didn't look at me again. He ran to his car, still crying, still dripping sauce, and drove away. Joyce nodded, satisfied. You picked a better life, she said. Good. She walked back to her house. And that was the last time I ever saw Caleb. Some people spiral when they lose control. Others rise when they reclaim themselves. I chose the second one. After Caleb drove off, lemon sauce streaking his hoodie, dignity pooling somewhere on my porch, I didn't rush inside. I stood there for a moment. Not frozen, not shaken, just present. The afternoon sun hit the siding of my house at that familiar angle, the one I'd admired 100 times while building it. Joyce's newly replanted tulips swayed gently in the breeze, protected now by fresh fencing and her ever-watchful eye. Joyce looked back at me once more before disappearing into her house. Nobody messes with my garden, she said, and nobody messes with a woman who knows her worth. Then she was gone. I went inside and locked the door. Not because I was afraid, but because that chapter was done. That night, Evan came over. He noticed the faint smear of sauce on the porch railing before I even mentioned it. Everything okay? He asked. I smiled. Better than okay. I told him the short version. No dramatics, no reliving, just facts. He laughed once, shook his head, and said, Your neighbor is a legend. She really is, I replied. Then he did something Caleb never could. He asked, Do you want to talk about it more, or do you want to leave it where it belongs? I leaned into him and exhaled. Right where it belongs. We cooked dinner together, nothing fancy, just easy food, shared space, soft music. The kind of night that doesn't need to be posted or praised to feel real. Later, as we sat on the couch, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't replaying the past. I wasn't wondering if I'd been too harsh. I wasn't second-guessing my boundaries. The guilt was gone. The self-doubt was gone. The need to explain myself, to justify why betrayal hurts, why gaslighting is abuse, why loyalty matters, was gone. I had done everything right. Over the next few months, life didn't explode into fireworks. It didn't need to. It unfolded. Steadily. Evan stayed consistent. Joyce stayed nosy in the best possible way. My career continued to grow. My house felt like mine again, not haunted by apologies I never owed. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances tried to update me on Caleb or Daria. I stopped them. I'm not interested, I said, and I meant it. Because indifference is the final consequence. Not anger. Not revenge. Indifference. The last I heard, Caleb bounced between jobs. Daria reinvented herself online, vague posting about healing and toxic dynamics without ever naming her own choices. They were still circling the same lessons. I had graduated. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to that phone lighting up the dark at 3:00 a.m. The moment my life split cleanly in two. And I feel gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Being chosen after you beg isn't love. Being apologized to after you're gaslit isn't respect. And staying quiet to keep the peace is just another way of abandoning yourself. I didn't win because they lost. I won because I refused to disappear. And that door? The one Caleb knocked on with his apology and his oversalted chicken? That was the last door he ever had access to. I closed it, and I didn't look back.